Some pretty big information, and ironically, that information is actually public, just no one's been looking at it. Because someone I've known for a few years has come forward and he's put together a picture of a network of bioweapons laboratories in Ukraine that is very large and very Washington supported, that could be quite dangerous for us all. He is going to remain anonymous, but his interview will be coming up very soon. But before that, let's take a little chit chat about biological weapons and their strange role in the nature of things, especially after the Cold War. Well, for any of you who are watching this program, you're probably pretty historically astute. I mean, if you're going to watch a guy ramble on about the way that Russia actually perceives international relations, current events, and geopolitics, then you probably know a thing or two about history, I would guess anyways. And you're probably well aware that biological warfare is not that new. You know, back in the olden days, especially we could say medieval times, it's always sort of I think there was a joke even in those Monty Python movies about chucking a diseased cow over the wall of the castle to make everyone within it sick. Now, I bring that up not because it's a kind of interesting point in history that disease warfare, at least, is pretty darn old. I bring it up because it was effective. When you throw dead bodies or diseased cows or whatever over the walls, and you're able to spread disease, which the enemy doesn't really understand back then, we're thinking the medieval mindset here, to a sort of cramped, trapped population inside the walls, being attacked from those spread out outside the walls, that's really effective. And it would seem that more or less, historically, somehow those diseases tended to kind of fade away pretty quick after the conquerors came in. There aren't a lot of stories that I've heard where disease spread throughout the city being invaded, then all the conquerors came in and died themselves. You know what I mean? So there's a certain logic to it. A very depressing page in American history, if we all remember, was the giving the Native Americans diseased blankets purposefully to kill them off. Again, this was, remember, do not mistake the word effective from the words morally correct or a thing a decent human being would do, but it was also effective in the sense that it certainly killed the enemy without killing many, if any, on the attacker's side. Now, that story tends to change around World War I, because in World War I, they used a whole bunch of different gases, mustard gas being the most famous, but I think they tried like pure chlorine, various other different agents were used, sort of experiments in the field, as it were. But what they found is that gases that cause a lot of burning, choking, or death in the enemy tend to not allow you to take their territory, because as they either flee or drop dead, you essentially contaminate the territory that you yourselves want to take. And when we're getting into this modern concept of biological, chemical types of war, there's a little bit of difference between biological and chemical, but they neither of them uses bullets. That's the main thing. These sort of ways to sort of indiscriminately and in some ways almost abstractly kill off your opponents via certain chemical or viral reactions. Well, the problem is now, in modern times, there's sort of no way to control that. And we saw during the Cold War that a lot of different agents and diseases were all being developed. But unlike nuclear missiles, which are very targeted, in which, you know, if key nuclear strikes during the Cold War could have been launched against the enemy without retaliation, the Earth would have been able to tolerate, you know, a couple more nuclear blasts. It certainly tolerated thousands of test blasts during the Cold War. And life would have been able to go on in theory. So essentially, with a nuclear strike that was unretaliated with limited use of nuclear missiles, that could have actually won the Cold War for one side instantaneously. Thankfully, that did not need to happen. But what wouldn't win the Cold War is releasing some sort of disease that just kills everyone. There is really no way to go back in time to some sort of pre-Columbian world where any sort of disease in one part of the world won't affect people in the other part of it. That's not going to happen. So it also kind of then makes you think, why do we develop biological weapons to this day? I would make the usual argument, as you've heard me talk about before, how the nature of the Cold War is very important to understand, because a lot of the things that we did as justification, it's the Cold War, we got to fight the Soviets, from an American standpoint, continue to happen even after the Cold War was over. But this is sort of an exception. Even during the Cold War, biological warfare was stupid. There's another thing. When you're talking about nuclear weapons, there are all sorts of countermeasures that could be developed. Remember, Reagan scared the Soviets with the whole Star Wars program, which apparently wasn't really real. But countermeasures are possible to try to intercept the nuclear missiles in flight, or some sort of perhaps EMP to sort of knock them out. Basically, at least conceptually, there could be some sort of defense for that. But there is no like counter biological weapons. I don't know. Maybe you guys out there are more better read than I am, but I don't remember reading anything about being able to make like preemptive counter disease bacteria that will protect us all from evil Soviet bioagents or something. And that's the problem. So bioweapons actually make no sense. They do not serve the purpose of nation state or superpower fighting nation state superpower. If they exist for a purpose, that purpose is something other. It's definitely not to win a war in the sense of war that you, me, and other people around us understand. It serves a very different mission, which makes it seem kind of interesting that, with this global problem we're having, there's two versions of where it came from. Remember, on YouTube, you're not allowed to mention it. Well, the American side said that's because Chinese people eat all sorts of animals they shouldn't be eating in very strange ways, like bats. And it is true that a lot of the great diseases of human history have come from animals. So that is very logical. But then the Chinese answer is they think it's because it was developed by Washington and released within their territory as sort of an attack on them, which any sane person would understand that attack on them would eventually spread to everyone. And so the Chinese side seems a lot more conspiratorial. But but just wait, because our guest is going to come up and he's going to tell us about a lot of these types of labs developing a lot of diseases for absolutely unknown to us reasons, and they are actually very, very close to the absolute center of the Eurasian landmass in the Ukraine. So maybe this Chinese conspiracy theory about the origin of the big problem we've been having might not be so crazy. Okay, so you've come forward to come onto my platform here and say that there is a BioLab network within Ukraine. That's a pretty tall order to believe. Could you please tell the audience where do you get your information from, and why should they believe you?
First of all, of course, it's not a conspiracy theory. It's all based on very well-known facts. For many, many years, you can just look and do your own search using some Department of Defense websites and investigating their programs and looking at the budgets, what are they doing, what they do finance, what the names of the programs, and they are doing it for many, many years actually. And you just simple connect all the dots and get the full picture, or maybe not the full, but at least big picture of what they are doing. And I have to say that it's all based on facts, on documents, and you just can easily double check what's there and do your own research. So you don't need to believe words or something. You just look at the publications and documents. You look at their videos published by the Department of Defense and so on.
Okay, so what specific projects has the American Department of Defense been running on the territory of the Ukraine? Let's go back to the beginning of all this, from the start.
It's all start, I believe, at 1998, or maybe a little bit earlier, with the collapse of Soviet Union, when Americans started basically investigating what was the Soviet defense program, And of course, one of their point of interest was Soviet biological weapon program. And so they started collect a lot of information, and they started basically investing a lot of money and into these investigations, and proposing some programs. They call it defense threat reduction programs, and offering those governments of new states like Ukraine and Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, and many other former Soviet states to work together on this program in terms of, or the idea was to make these threats from biological weapons less, just make it not a threat again. So if you know what I mean. And the most active part, if we're talking about Ukraine, started at 2005 when American Department of Defense, they signed an agreement with Ukrainian Ministry of Healthcare, and saying that they will set up a dozen of laboratories all across the Ukraine, and they invest in the equipment, building the laboratories, and all the results of their work. Basically, they will go back to the US, to the Pentagon, and the Pentagon basically will own all these results of their work, and all these works will be under full control of Pentagon specialists.
So when the Soviet Union collapsed, or was broken up, or betrayed from the inside, however you want to look at that particular moment in history, basically the Russian Federation really carried on the legacy in a legal sense of the Soviet Union. So especially the Ukraine and Kazakhstan were supposed to return all of their biological and nuclear weapons sort of to Russia, and then become more neutral and unarmed states. And from what I understand, they did do that. So maybe what you're just kind of talking about is you're mistaking things here. I mean, there was a program to sort of move biological and nuclear agents back to Russia, and didn't that program kind of work? What I mean to say is, aren't all those weapons gone since the early 90s?
That's right, and you're right that was only the part of the project. Yes, indeed, all the nuclear and biological weapons were just moved back to Russia, or they've been and the carriers of these weapons, they were basically just destroyed. However, the laboratories, the scientists, and the samples, if we are talking about the biological weapon, or its sample of diseases or viruses, they still kept at those countries, at the laboratories. So those collections of these bacteria or viruses, they were not moved to any other location except the US, of course. So, and Ukraine still has thousands of the samples of these agents, biological agents, or viruses, coronaviruses, and many others. Either it's human diseases or non-human, like animal diseases. So this is the idea is to control all these collections, and to control these and finance these studies or researches in these countries. They really finance these researches, these studies on, if we're talking about Ukraine. On the Ukraine territory, they have 12 or huge reference laboratories all across Ukraine, They have 3 laboratories in Kiev, in Lvov, in Kharkiv, in Odessa, in all main cities where they still work and they still make researches of very specific diseases like leptospirosis or new sorts of flu on people. They have really separate projects on that. They have this project have names, and they have separate programs. So they still doing new researches on both either on people or on animals, and so you can see the information.
Okay, so what's the scale of this all? How many biological weapons and laboratories are we talking about, and what's their potential?
At the moment, we know about 12 or 13 huge laboratories in Ukraine, but we also know that the network of these laboratories is way larger on Ukraine. It's roughly 300 smaller laboratories, and from 12 to 15 large reference laboratories. They have 2 laboratories with biological safety level 3. It's very high level, and other laboratories have lower level of biological safety. So it's I believe that it's can be extended in quite short time, and but another thing to mention here is that what they do at the moment is that they do conduct some researches on new medicines, on new substances, pharmaceutical substances, on local citizens, on Ukrainians, and they don't perform it somewhere probably in the US, but they do it on Ukrainians, and they doing it on purpose.
To be clear, you're talking about pharmaceutical testing, not weapons testing, right?
Exactly. Pharmaceutical tests, they are being conducted by Pfizer and Merck companies, and people are just wondering, of course, if these pills are very expensive and Ukrainians just don't have money to buy them. Let's say the treatment would cost $700. So, yeah, and they just don't have money. So why they do it in Ukraine? Obviously, it's not for the Ukrainians. Just they're searching for side effects, of course, and they are doing it for free. These people, these, let's say, volunteers, or maybe they are not just not paid for that, and the results, as always, they're kind of secret, they're confidential. No one can get any access to those results. So these programs, they are huge, and Ukrainian government, they're pushing some laws which would allow this big pharma to introduce the new tabs or pharmaceutical substances very easily and very fast on the Ukrainian market without proper testing.
Now, if I were the American government, again, I'm kind of skeptical of the effectiveness of bioweapons, but if I were to run that program, I would want to have it somewhere in a very remote location in Nevada, or maybe the northern part of Alaska. So, if some mistakes were to happen, perhaps they could be caught in time. And most importantly, wouldn't you want to have all American-born employees running that kind of operation? It seems a little bit dangerous to leave it in the hands of foreigners.
Exactly. This is maybe it's the main question why they're doing it in not at the desert, but in the cities with a population over 1 million people actually. Or they're doing it, they have their laboratories at with huge airports, basically it's hubs, right? And with huge traffic. And so we just researching the documents, we can understand that this is very important for them to have these laboratories and make these researches in highly populated area. And Ukraine is really kind of very sweet for the American Department of Defense in this sense, because of its population, and they have infrastructure, they have scientists, and their government is really controllable, because in some other countries, government or people just stood against these experiments and just kicked off these laboratories from their countries, like they did in Kyrgyzstan or in Belarus, which they were part of that program. And I have to say that in 2013, Yanukovych government, they started asking questions. What? Guys, we don't have an access to the results. What are you doing here? Our inspections cannot go to these laboratories. So what's going on there? And then 2014, and they call it revolution, but it was coup de main, right? So it came, and now these laboratories are fine, they are working, and they have even more programs.
So, now I'm starting to get the picture that maybe if Russia were to go in to Ukraine and try to save the Donbass, it could affect America in a way that's not really mentioned in the headlines of major media sources. So, what would happen if Russia were to go in and take back what it wants?
I cannot imagine such a situation, actually, when Russia military acts, and I don't see how that would affect American defense. For me it's just nonsense. But of course, American government and the Pentagon, they're saying they're just pushing this narrative that Russia is going to do some military action against Ukraine, and they're pushing this narrative, and they have to control everything on Ukraine, including these laboratories and so on and so forth. But I believe it's not the case, and never will be the case.
What you're claiming, sir, is pretty darn scary. Now, if you're telling the truth, and you want the audience to believe you, what should they do about this? What should our English-speaking audience do with this information? What is your end goal with exposing all of this?
Honestly, I don't really think that common people can do anything with that. Just basically, just start asking questions. Why the American government investing hundreds of millions of dollars into all these laboratories somewhere, actually not only in Ukraine, but all over the world. On Ukraine, it's $250 million have already been invested in these laboratories, and they have these biological laboratories all across the globe. So of course it's it's a very strange situation, because so just ask questions. Why Pentagon is so interested in these countries, because to me it's not for the good of those people who are living there, right? So basically it's again it's against someone. So to me it seems better, there are way better ways how to spend taxpayers' money. And of course, there is a huge field of corruption in such programs, since the defense programs, and you can never have an access to financial reports or the results of these programs. So you just need to be aware what's going on. And when someone starts saying it's a conspiracy theory or something like that, so you, in this case, the bell should start ringing and saying, hey, it's not a conspiracy, it is a real program, and they have been conducted for at least 15 or many years, and in the future I'm sure that we will see even more information popping up here and there about these programs, or maybe even more interesting